The room was silent except for the soft hum of the city outside, a stark contrast to the chaos brewing inside. It was a night that started like any other, until it wasn't. He had never meant for it to happen. One night. One single moment of weakness, and everything in his life would change forever. She had been a stranger, just a woman he met by chance at a work event. The connection was brief, a fleeting moment, nothing more than an accidental spark that flickered in the dark. But in that instant, it felt like the world stood still. The warmth of the hotel bar, the subtle flirtation, and before he knew it, he was alone with her in a hotel room. It was a mistake, an escape from the suffocating pressures of everyday life. The guilt gnawed at him, but it wasn't enough to stop. The next morning, reality crashed down like a thunderstorm. As soon as he opened his eyes, he remembered. The words of his wife, the woman who had been by his side for years, echoed in his mind, "If you ever betray me, don't come back." He had always thought she was just being dramatic, that such a thing would never happen. They were solid. They had built their life together, and there was no reason to believe something like this could tear them apart. But now, with the weight of his actions settling on him, the thought of returning to her, of seeing the hurt in her eyes, seemed unbearable. He didn't know what hurt more, the act itself, or the realization that he had just destroyed the very thing he had spent years building. He had no way of knowing how to undo it, or if it was even possible to undo. It was over, he thought. His marriage, the trust, everything he thought he knew about his life, it was all gone in the blink of an eye. The days that followed were a blur. He couldn't face his wife, couldn't find the right words to explain himself, not that any words would make a difference. Every time he thought about coming clean, he imagined the crushing disappointment in her eyes, the hurt that would change everything. Could he live with that? Could they ever rebuild what was broken? When he finally mustered the courage to tell her, it wasn't a confession, it was a plea. "I made a mistake. Please, just hear me out. It wasn't supposed to happen." But even as the words left his mouth, he knew they were hollow, meaningless. He could see the wall she put up, hear the edge in her voice as she spoke. "You betrayed me. You threw away everything we had for one moment. One moment with someone who didn't matter." And just like that, everything he had known, every connection they had built together, seemed to slip away. The question lingered in the air like an impossible weight: did it end everything? It was only the beginning of a journey he never imagined he'd take. A journey into a world where everything he thought was secure was suddenly a fragile thread. And now, as he stood on the edge of it all, he had to wonder, was there any hope left to fight for? Or had he truly destroyed everything? The house felt like a foreign place now. The familiar scent of coffee brewing in the mornings, the quiet hum of the television at night, it was all still there, but it didn't feel like home anymore. It felt cold. Empty. Like the space had been hollowed out, leaving only remnants of the life they once shared. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. His mind raced, but he couldn't focus. His heart thudded painfully in his chest. Every time he thought of his wife, of the way she looked at him after he confessed, his stomach twisted with regret. She hadn't said much, but her eyes, those eyes that once held love and trust, were now filled with something far more dangerous: indifference. She wasn't angry, not in the way he expected. No, it was worse. She was numb. And that numbness cut deeper than any outburst could. She spent her days in silence, avoiding him as much as possible. She didn't yell, didn't cry, didn't demand answers. She simply existed in the same space, but it was as if she was no longer truly there. She moved like a ghost, going through the motions, making meals, tending to the house, even laughing with their friends on the phone, but when it came to him, there was nothing. She couldn't look at him without that cold, sharp distance between them. He tried. Oh, how he tried. Every moment that passed without some attempt at reconciliation felt like another nail in the coffin of their relationship. He tried texting, calling, and even showing up at her office unannounced, hoping for a moment of connection, anything to break through that wall she had built around herself. But every effort was met with silence or curt, dismissive responses. "I need space," she would say, her voice void of any emotion. And yet, every time he left her side, he felt like he was walking away from the one thing he had always believed he could rely on, her love. He didn't know how to fix this. How could he? The very foundation of their relationship had been cracked, and there was no clear way to repair it. Every word he said seemed to make things worse. Every apology felt like a band-aid on a wound too deep to heal. Days turned into weeks, and the silence between them grew louder. It was suffocating. He couldn't escape it. He'd come home from work and hear the quiet ticking of the clock in the kitchen, the silence in the living room. The absence of her presence was more than just physical, it was emotional, like something had been ripped from him. He would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, his thoughts racing. How did everything go so wrong? He thought about the one-night stand, how stupid it had been, how reckless. He couldn't understand how he had let that one moment of weakness lead to this. He had thrown away everything for something that meant nothing. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that it wasn't just about the mistake. It was about everything that had led to it. The long hours at work, the missed dinners, the growing distance between them that neither had acknowledged until it was too late. The marriage wasn't perfect, he knew that. But he had never imagined it would unravel so quickly, so completely. The doubt crept in slowly, like a shadow. Did she still love him? Was there any hope for them at all? The more time passed, the more he wondered if the damage was beyond repair. His mind circled back to that simple question, had he destroyed everything? And then, one evening, when he returned home from work, she was gone. Just like that. Her car wasn't in the driveway. Her belongings, the ones she couldn't bear to part with, were gone. The only sign she had been there was a single note on the kitchen table. It read, "I need to think. I'll be back when I'm ready." His heart sank as he read the words over and over again. It was her way of telling him she wasn't ready to make a decision. She wasn't ready to let him go, but she wasn't ready to forgive him either. It was the longest night of his life, and he realized, more than ever, that he had no idea what would come next. Would she come back? Would he ever be able to fix this? Or was this the beginning of the end? The days after the note were the hardest he had ever endured. Every second felt like a weight pressing down on his chest, each breath harder than the last. He spent his morning staring at his phone, hoping for a text, a call, anything. But nothing came. Each evening, he would arrive home to the same silence, the same emptiness. It was as if he was living in a world where everything he had built was crumbling around him, and there was no way to stop it. He knew he had to do something. Sitting back and hoping she would come around wasn't an option anymore. She needed to see that he was committed, that he was truly sorry for what he had done. But how could he make her see that? The trust they had once shared, something so solid, so unbreakable, was now shattered into pieces that seemed impossible to put back together. He started small. Each day, he left a message on her phone, just to let her know he was thinking about her, even if she didn't respond. "I'm sorry for what I did. I'll be here when you're ready to talk." Simple. Honest. Yet, as the days dragged on without a reply, the weight of those words grew heavier. He knew he had made a mistake, he had betrayed her, broken the most sacred vow of their relationship. But it wasn't just the affair that hurt her, it was everything that had led up to it. The lack of attention. The silence between them. The way they had both drifted apart without noticing. But even in the face of this realization, he couldn't bring himself to give up. He remembered the way things used to be, the way she would laugh at his jokes, how they would sit together on the couch and talk about everything and nothing at the same time. The warmth, the comfort they had shared before all of this. It felt so distant now, but he couldn't forget it. And he didn't want to. So, he took action. He started doing things he hadn't done in years. He cleaned the house, really cleaned it, deep cleaned it, like he had when they first moved in together. He bought her favorite flowers and placed them in the living room, hoping she'd notice. He went through old photos, reminiscing about the good times they had, and he found a way to share those memories with her. One evening, after she had returned home from work, he put on their favorite song, the one they had danced to at their wedding, and left a note beside the record player that simply read, "I miss us." But it wasn't enough. She barely looked at the flowers. She hadn't touched the note. She came home, locked herself in the bedroom, and left him alone. Every attempt felt like a failure, and with each one, his hope began to fade. The silence between them grew even more oppressive, and he couldn't help but wonder if there was even a way back from this. Could trust be rebuilt? Was he fooling himself to think things could go back to the way they were? Then, after several days of silence, she finally spoke. One morning, he found her sitting at the kitchen table, staring out the window, her face pale and tired. She looked up as he entered the room, and for the first time in weeks, he saw a flicker of something. Maybe it was hope, or maybe just exhaustion, but it was something. She finally spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again. You've hurt me so deeply, and I'm not sure I can forgive you. But I need time. I need to think about what I want, what we want." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. She wasn't angry anymore, not like she had been at first. But her pain, her disappointment, was all too clear. He knew it wasn't just about the affair anymore, it was about everything he had failed to see, everything he had taken for granted. As she left the room, he sat down, feeling the weight of his mistakes. He had no idea if they could move forward. But for the first time in a long while, he felt the smallest glimmer of hope. She hadn't walked away completely. She hadn't given up. She was still there, still willing to think about their future. But could they rebuild? Could he prove himself worthy of her trust again? He had no answers, but one thing was certain, he wasn't going to give up. Not without a fight. The days dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity, and with each passing moment, the weight of what he had done seemed to grow heavier. He felt like he was walking a tightrope, balancing between hope and despair, unsure if he was moving closer to rebuilding or falling into the abyss. Every day he spent waiting, trying to prove himself to her, he found himself more lost than before. She was still distant, her walls as high as ever, and no matter what he did, they didn't seem to come down. Then, one morning, he received a call from an old friend, someone he hadn't spoken to in years. Mark had been his closest friend back in college, and they had kept in touch over the years, but their conversations had become less frequent as time passed. Mark had always been the kind of person who could cut through the chaos with his simple wisdom, and in that moment, the sound of his voice on the other end of the line felt like a lifeline. "I heard what happened, and I'm sorry, man. But I think you need to hear something from someone who isn't caught up in the emotions of it all." The tone in Mark's voice was serious, and it immediately grabbed his attention. "You've got to understand that you can't fix this by just showing up and being sorry. It's not enough to just apologize and wait. She's hurt, and that's something you can't take back with flowers or deep cleaning the house. You need to give her something more than that, something that proves you're committed to more than just patching things up. You need to show her that you understand what you've done and that you're willing to change. But most importantly, you need to show her that you've changed for yourself, not just for her. If you can't do that, she'll never believe that you're sincere." The days were starting to blur together. Every morning felt like a repeat of the one before, filled with the same quiet tension. His efforts to change, to better himself, were beginning to show results, but the gap between them, between him and his wife, still felt insurmountable. She hadn't left. She hadn't filed for divorce. But she hadn't come back to him either. There were moments when he caught glimpses of the woman he had once known, the woman he had loved, but those moments were fleeting. She seemed distant, like a shadow that slipped away whenever he reached out. It was Friday evening when it all came to a head. He had been working late, trying to finish a project at the office that he had been putting off for weeks. He hadn't spoken to her much that day, but he knew she had been home. He thought maybe tonight would be different. Maybe tonight, they could talk. Maybe tonight, she would finally tell him what was going through her mind, what she was really feeling. He came home to find the house quiet, too quiet. The smell of dinner was still in the air, but there was no sound of her moving about the kitchen. The TV was off. No music playing in the background. It was just him, standing in the doorway, looking into an empty room. He called her name, his voice low. "Hey, you here?" No answer. His heart began to race. He walked through the living room, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The bedroom door was slightly ajar. He pushed it open, and there she was, sitting on the edge of the bed, her face buried in her hands. The sight of her like this, so broken, so lost, stopped him in his tracks. His chest tightened, and he suddenly realized how much he had taken her strength, her patience, for granted. She had been holding on for so long, pretending that things were fine when they weren't. And now, it seemed like she had reached her breaking point. She didn't look up when he entered the room. Instead, she spoke quietly, her voice trembling as she said, "I don't know if I can keep doing this. I don't know if I can keep waiting, hoping you'll change, hoping things will get better. I don't know if I can keep pretending that everything is okay when it's not." His throat tightened. Her words were like a knife, cutting deep into him. She was right. All this time, he had been waiting for her to forgive him, for her to come back to him, but he hadn't truly understood how much she had been suffering. How much pain she was holding inside. How long she had been carrying the weight of his mistake. He stepped closer, his voice shaking as he tried to find the right words. "I know I've hurt you. And I know I can't undo what I've done. But please, please don't give up on us. I love you. I'm sorry. And I'm trying. I'm trying to be a better man, to be the man you deserve." She finally looked up at him, and in her eyes, he saw something he hadn't seen in weeks, anger, sadness, and something else, something deeper. She stood up slowly, her face hardening as she looked at him. "I don't know if I can believe that anymore," she said softly. "I don't know if I can trust that you're really changing. I don't know if I can keep waiting for you to fix what's broken between us." He felt like the floor was slipping out from under him. "You're not just giving up on me, are you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're not giving up on us?" She didn't answer right away. The days following her departure felt like an eternity. Each one passed in a blur of restless nights and empty mornings. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt so disconnected from everything, from the world around him and from the man he used to be. Every action, every thought, seemed to be overshadowed by the weight of his mistake. The guilt and the pain were relentless, constantly gnawing at him. He spent hours walking through the house, staring at the empty spaces she had once filled, haunted by the silence that now defined his existence. He kept thinking about what she had said before leaving. "I need to find out who I am without you." Those words haunted him, but they also made him realize something he hadn't fully considered before. In all the years they had been together, he had never really given her the space to be herself. He had taken her for granted, assuming that their bond was enough to carry them through anything. But in reality, he had never truly seen her. Not in the way she deserved. And that thought, her absence, her need to discover herself outside of their relationship, was what eventually pushed him to face something that had been buried deep inside him. He hadn't really known himself either. The man he had become wasn't the person he had set out to be. The life they had built together had become a routine, a cycle of expectations and compromises, and he had stopped being the man who could dream, who could inspire. He had lost sight of the man who had chosen her, who had promised to love her in the most genuine way possible. One evening, after another long day of soul-searching, he found himself sitting in the living room with the old journals he had kept from years ago. He hadn't looked at them in years, but something compelled him to dig them out. As he flipped through the pages, memories came rushing back, dreams he had once had, aspirations he had left behind, and a version of himself he hadn't even realized he had abandoned. His heart ached as he read about the man he used to be, the man who had been passionate, driven, and full of hope. There it was, in black and white, his commitment to personal growth, his passion for life, and most importantly, his promise to always strive to be better. He had made that promise not just to his wife, but to himself. And somewhere along the way, he had broken it. The realization hit him with a jolt, like a lightning strike to his soul. He had spent so much time focusing on saving his marriage, on fixing what he had broken between them, that he had neglected to fix himself. He couldn't expect her to see any change in him if he hadn't changed for the right reasons. He had been trying to rebuild their relationship, but he had neglected to rebuild himself first. And that was the key. If he was going to have any chance of getting her back, he had to prove to himself first that he was worthy of her trust. He had to find the man he had lost, find the passion, the drive, and the love he had once felt for life. Only then could he hope to offer her the love and the trust that she needed. The decision was clear. He needed to embrace the change he had started, not just for her, but for himself. And so, with renewed determination, he set out to rebuild his life, one piece at a time. The first step was simple but important. He contacted a therapist, a professional who could help him work through the emotions, the guilt, and the regret that had consumed him for so long. It wasn't easy to admit that he needed help, but he knew it was necessary. He couldn't continue to carry the weight of his mistakes without addressing the deeper issues that had led to them. Next, he started setting new goals for himself, ones that weren't tied to his relationship but to his own personal growth. He signed up for classes in subjects he had always been curious about but never had the time to explore. He reconnected with old friends, rekindled hobbies he had abandoned, and started reading again, something he had stopped doing long ago. And slowly, very slowly, he began to feel something he hadn't felt in years: hope. Hope that he could change. Hope that he could become the man he had once been, and better. Hope that he could find a way back to her. But there was still no word from her. She was still gone, still taking the time she needed to find herself. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, he felt ready to face whatever came next. One afternoon, as he sat at his desk, his phone buzzed with a message. His heart skipped a beat as he saw her name appear on the screen. She hadn't reached out to him in weeks, and now, here she was. It was just a simple message, but it was everything he had been waiting for. "I've been thinking about everything. I think I'm ready to talk. Can we meet?" His hands shook as he read the words again. It wasn't a promise of anything, but it was a step. A sign that maybe, just maybe, there was hope for them after all. He took a deep breath and replied, his heart pounding, "Yes. I'd love to." When and where? The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, he felt that maybe the possibility of rebuilding was real. He had a long way to go, but this was a start. And that was all he needed. The days leading up to their meeting felt like a whirlwind. He spent every waking moment preparing himself for whatever might happen. There was no guarantee, no promise that things would go back to the way they were. But as he waited for the day to come, he knew that this was his moment, the moment he would have to face everything he had done, and whatever the outcome, he would have to accept it. When he finally arrived at the cafe where they agreed to meet, his heart raced. The familiar smell of coffee and pastries filled the air, but all he could focus on was the space at the table where she would sit. His mind flashed back to all the good times they had shared in places like this, before everything had fallen apart. And then, there she was. She walked in, just as beautiful and composed as she always had been, but there was something different about her now. She looked stronger, more confident, but also more uncertain. The weight of everything that had happened was evident in her eyes, yet there was still a softness there, a softness he hadn't seen in months. He stood up when she approached, his breath catching in his chest. She hesitated for just a moment before sitting down. There was an uncomfortable silence between them at first, and he could feel the distance that still lingered between them. But this time, it wasn't the silence of indifference, it was the silence of two people who were unsure of what to say next. He spoke first, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've spent the last few weeks thinking about everything, the mistakes I made, the things I neglected, the way I lost myself. I've been trying to become a better man, not just for you, but for me. I know I can't erase the past, but I'm asking you to trust me again. I'm asking for another chance to prove that I'm the man you deserve." She didn't say anything for a moment, just looked at him as if weighing his words. Her eyes were filled with a mix of pain and hope, as if she wasn't sure whether to believe him. But then, after what felt like an eternity, she finally spoke. "I've spent a lot of time thinking too," she said quietly. "I've thought about what you did, about how much it hurt me. But I've also thought about everything we've been through together, all the years we spent building this life. And I've realized something." He waited, his heart pounding in his chest. "I've realized that I don't want to lose who I am in this. I can't put my life on hold waiting for someone else to change. But I also don't want to lose us, what we had. I don't want to give up without trying. So, I think I'm willing to try again. But only if we do this the right way. We both have to change, not just for each other, but for ourselves. We can't go back to what we were. We have to build something new." He could hardly believe what he was hearing. It wasn't a promise of perfection. It wasn't a guarantee that everything would be fine. But it was a chance. A real chance to rebuild, to move forward, not as the people they had been, but as the people they were becoming. Tears welled up in his eyes, and he reached across the table, taking her hand gently. "I don't deserve you. I know that. But I will spend the rest of my life proving that I'm worthy of this chance. I'll fight for us, for what we can become." She squeezed his hand, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he saw a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "We both have a lot of work to do," she said softly, "but I think we're both willing to try." They sat there in silence for a moment, the weight of their words sinking in. They didn't have all the answers, and they didn't know what the future would hold. But they had something they hadn't had in months, understanding. They had a shared commitment to change, to growth, and to rebuilding what had been broken. As they stood to leave, he realized something important. The real work wasn't in the big moments, the grand gestures. It was in the quiet moments, in the small acts of kindness, patience, and understanding. It was in the willingness to grow, to face the hard truths, and to learn from them. And as they walked out of the cafe, side by side, he knew that this was just the beginning. There would be struggles ahead, and the road wouldn't be easy. But they were both willing to walk it together. The life lesson was clear: healing doesn't happen overnight. It takes time, patience, and a willingness to change, both for yourself and for the ones you love. Sometimes, it's not about fixing what's broken, but learning how to rebuild it stronger than before. And that's what they were doing. Together.